Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's AGC of America webinar, Making Lean Construction Principles a Habit with Scrum. My name is John Ross, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator at AGC of America in Arlington, Virginia. Before we begin our presentation, I do have a few brief announcements. If you have any questions for the presenter, on your screen on the GoToWebinars toolbar, you should see a questions box. Please use this area for submitting questions. Also, do feel free to submit questions as they occur to you. Please be aware, though, that we will be holding off on answering questions until today's speaker has completed their presentation. Except for the speaker, attendees will be muted for the duration of the webinar. Also, anybody who is registered for today's webinar will receive an email within the next 3 to 5 business days with a link to access the audio recording and a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation. I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Felipe Engineer Manriquez. How are you doing, Felipe?
I'm doing well, John. Thank you.
Fantastic. Glad to hear it. I'm going to go ahead and turn everything over to you.
All right. Welcome, everybody. How's it going? Hope everyone's doing really well. So again, please participate like John encouraged you to do, because we will have time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so here's my disclaimer to all of you. Before we begin, be warned. Using lean principles and agile methods result in increased capacity for you and for your teams. This means there's more time to improve, optimize, and coach others. That will be your problem. So you've been warned. Now, seriously, making lean construction principles a habit with Scrum is we're going to really just break that down into 3 different areas. First, we'll start with habit. Then we'll look at lean construction principles in detail. And then finally, we'll end with the Scrum Framework, so you can see how to make this a habit in your own work. Okay, so a habit, so that we all get on the same page, it's an acquired mode of behavior that has become nearly or completely involuntary. I didn't learn about habit really well, even though I'm just a collection of habits, until I read this book by Charles Duhigg called The Power of Habit: Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business. The great thing that Charles introduces here is this idea of a habit loop being formed of just 3 parts: cue, a routine, and a reward. Let's dive into that a little bit and look at the cue first. The typical cues that the best researchers in neuroscience all agree fall into just a few categories. The first being location. This could be, when you go into an airport, or even better example, when I go to the doctor for my annual physical and I see my doctor in a lab coat or in her doctor's outfit, if you will, her uniform, if I've been good the year prior, my blood pressure might start to stay level. But if I've been bad, if I've been eating out, every week and just not doing the good, healthy things that I should do, just being in the doctor's office is going to make my blood pressure rise, right? That's an example. Another one is time, like getting sleepy at the same time of day or anticipating meals. Another one is emotional state. That's another cue. The 4th cue is other people. The 5th cue is immediately preceding action. So it might be, if you're exercising really hard, taking deep breaths at the end, or something like that to that effect. Very simple. So let's look at a conversational habit. Asking someone, how are you? And then they respond, I'm really busy. That is something that triggers a response in my mind. Let's take a look at that another way. So you can also think of habit loop sentence. When people answer, how are you, with busy, I mentally raise a red flag because I know they're having a capacity challenge. It's all in my head. You can't see this happening. A lot of habits are invisible, and this habit is very invisible. So remember, when Charles Duhigg had said that habit loop is a cue, a routine, and reward. So what parts of this normal everyday greeting that we hear, and I hear this every day no matter where I go, it's really going to be a cue. It's this question asked, and I'm initiating this. So it could be location and other people dependent, if you remember some of the common cues. So I'll see someone I haven't seen in a while, or even somebody new, and I'll just ask, how are you? That's the cue. The routine will be their response. In their brain, when someone asks me, how am I? They just answer. And if people answer, I'm really busy, my reward is confirmation bias, or just that feeling that here's someone that might need some help or is struggling with something. I'm really busy always triggers more conversation with me. So if you meet me out in the real world and not in a webinar, and I ask you, how are you? Unless you're ready to talk for about half an hour, don't say I'm really busy. So that's habit, very simply said. The next thing is lean construction principles. Let's start with the most important. Respect people. People transform ideas and materials into value. They are at the center of all business interactions, no matter how complex or simple. So we always ask with the respect people, value yourself first and then extend it to others. That is the first lean construction principle. And of course, lean construction principles are lean principles. Those that you've studied lean in other areas will recognize some of the other principles that follow. The next one is pooling customer value. The customer is the one that defines the value, and it needs to be understood by all members of your team or your organization. Know the definition of value from the customer's point of view. Also, any person or a group receiving your work in a value stream is a customer. So treat these handoffs as customer interactions. So, and just to prepare this webinar, I worked with Bree from Procore, and I had to ask a lot of questions about, what did they want to serve, what message wanted to be spread. So I started pulling value just from understanding what Procore valued in order to put this presentation together. So you can use these all the time in any type of interaction. The next one is seek to create flow. Focus on processes and flow. Understanding value allows people to eliminate non-value adding steps, which often shortens any given process and improves flow efficiency. Notice I said flow efficiency, not people. People measure themselves as effectiveness. Don't confuse the two. Efficiency is a measure of processes. One-piece flow is the ideal, and we should strive for that in any single project. And you'll see how Scrum reinforces one-piece flow in a bit. Minimize and eliminate multitasking. It's a myth, and it's disrespectful to our human character. And I hope that you can see how just in these first three principles, they build upon each other. If I just start at creating better flow, I have to pull customer value, because this flow of what I'm doing, transformation materials, processes, or a combination, is about delivering more value to the customer. And if I'm delivering more customer value, I'm showing my customers respect, and I'm respecting people. They build in both directions. Here's another one is eliminating waste. So you do this by a disciplined focus on what is of value. There's that value again, pulling back to number 2. Stop doing things that are not. According to research by the Construction Industry Institute, about 50% of time on construction projects, both in the design phase, all the way through shovel in the ground, building a building phase, or other types of construction projects, the time is spent on non-value adding work, compared to roughly less than 15% in other industries like manufacturing. The importance of this data is to see that there is great opportunity for improvement. That's good news for all you optimists out there, including me. Don't feel so bad knowing that about 60% of what you're doing in your everyday process is not value add. Just realize how easy it is to eliminate waste from your processes, create better flow, pull more customer value, and increase respect. The next one is continuously improve. Embrace a mindset of continuous improvement. Encourage experimentation with yourself and people in your teams. Learn from manageable failures. Fail, spelled F-A-I-L, is the first attempt in learning. F, first, A, attempt, I, in, L, learning. And learning is how improvement occurs. If you're not sure how to start, pick a process that you're involved in and make it a standard. Once you standardize your process, you'll be able to improve. Improvement upon standards lead to breakthroughs and innovations. The minimum of all you see here and these first 5 principles to have a lean mindset is really 1 and 5. Respect people and continuously improve will be the gateway to the other 4. But wait, there's one more. Finally, optimize the system, not just the parts. A system has inputs, processes inside with people, outputs, and often feedback loops. Use lean tools and methods to help with tactical improvement efforts. Benefit the whole project from the customer's perspective. And it doesn't matter what type of project it is. It doesn't have to always be a building project. Teams that continuously learn, identify value, and eliminate waste enjoy massive returns on their investment of efforts. That translates directly into business value. Okay, so those are the principles. A lot of the times people ask me, which do I start with? And I'll say, if you have no experience with any of these, obviously I'm biased, and I always say start with number 1, respect people. But if you feel like that's too idealistic of a place to start, then let's go with eliminate waste. So that's number 4. And why would you start there? That's often where people start and associate lean with. So let's see why. Look here on the left. If you eliminate waste, you'll build capacity, recognize and take action against waste daily. The best video I've ever seen on the major types of wastes is this one here. It's called What Are the Different Types of Waste in Lean? And there's a direct YouTube link there. You all have access to the slides that will be shared by AGC after the webinar. And you can click on the link here in the slide deck and watch this short 2-minute, 11-second video on your own. One of the best. But let's just pick one and go deeper into one of the wastes. Let's pick waiting. Waiting is waste through delays or stoppages. Waiting for instructions, waiting for the next production step, or simply running slow computers. These are all examples of waiting. When you're waiting, you're not able to add value. You're not able to be in a flow state, and you're definitely not respecting people. You're not doing anything. You're just waiting. Let's test to see how well we know this. And I always tell people, think about these wastes like unwelcome house guests. Once you start to recognize them, you want to get them out of your house as soon as possible. So here's an experiment. Let's say I've got 3 days to work because I'm traveling on Thursday and Friday and I'll be unavailable. The first batch of my work, ignore the question for now. The first thing I'm going to do is I have 4 hours of work and then I need someone else's help. And they need about 2 hours to finish their part. And once they give me their part, I need 2 more hours to finish it completely. So you can see in this total for this one single task, 4 plus 2 plus 2, it's 8 hours. So it could completely get done in a single day. And I have 3 days to do it. Now, to reduce waiting time, when should I make the request phone call of the person that's going to help me? They're not in the office with me. My options are afternoon, noon, or morning. And you can see some of you are thinking it's 8 hours total. You could do it all on Monday. You're right, except the person that's going to help me do this isn't in the office with me. I don't know even if they're at work on Monday. If I wait until Wednesday, assuming that everything's going to be perfect and I'm just really lucky, I may get it done on Wednesday before I travel, but I may not. The very best answer I've heard to this question is morning. Monday morning before I start, make the call and try to connect with the person that's going to do the 2 hours worth of work. That way I have all day Monday to potentially catch up with them and make sure that they can deliver to me what I need so I can finish the work. And then that leaves me Tuesday and Wednesday as buffers to work. And if they don't connect with me on Monday, then at least I have Tuesday again to try to connect even while I work. You see, it's not that easy. to just think, I'm not waiting and eliminating waiting. At first glance, it looks like an easy question, but it's not. It takes time. And don't feel bad. It took me years to learn the 8 major types of waste. This is just one experiment question. Try to see if you can eliminate waiting on your own the rest of this afternoon when you go back to work. Now, my favorite part, the Scrum Framework. So what is Scrum? It's a framework within which people can address complex adaptive problems while productively and creatively delivering products or services of the highest possible value. But this is the textbook definition. This is what Scrum is. And this is what Scrum looks like. This is what Scrum is, compliments of IT Agile. What a beautiful drawing that they made. When we finish this presentation, you'll be able to explain the entire Scrum framework by just this drawing alone. What you don't see here is how Scrum got its name and what's working in the background. So there was 2 Japanese researchers, Nanaka and Takeuchi, that wrote this paper called The New Product Development System some time ago, a couple decades ago. And Jeff Sutherland, one of the co-creators of Scrum, came across this Harvard Business Review article and was just fascinated that this was a game-changing paper. And what the 2 researchers were studying, they were studying Japanese manufacturing companies. And what they noticed, in contrast to manufacturing companies in the United States, was that everyone in the company, from the entry-level employee all the way to the CEO, were working in one direction. And they called it a Scrum. And you can see in this photograph, you've got the New Zealand All Blacks here on the right. Let's just stick with them on the right. They are all moving in one direction to put the ball back in play and move down the field. That's the objective. Put the ball back in play and move down the field in one direction, locked in arms. And like I said, it's invisible. And what's the invisible part are the Scrum values. The first one being respect, completely aligned with lean construction principles. The next value that you see on the field, and you'll see when you start to operate within a Scrum team, or you start operating Scrum of your own, you also have openness. It takes openness in order to do things, to be open to just new ideas and doing things differently than you do now. You also need courage to take action. This is not something that is heavily used in construction. It was developed originally in software. And even in software, they recognize as a value that people in software development will need courage in order to use this instead of traditional waterfall project management methodologies. You also need focus. You need focus in order to work through the framework and reap all the benefits that it offers. And finally, you need commitment. And the nice synonym that I like for commitment is discipline. And my favorite type of discipline is self-discipline, the discipline you impose on yourself. And you can see, in order to be playing at the highest levels of rugby, all 5 of these values will work, and all 5 of these values as well work in Scrum. So like I said, it requires teamwork. And in Scrum, the team is going to deliver value. They're going to work on beneficial transformation of information, materials, or a combination of both. And value is simply what your customers pay for. Okay, so let's start breaking this drawing down. We'll start on the bottom left with product backlog. The backlog here, I'm going to pick. I'm going to say that if we answer these 5 questions, where, why, who, when, and how, we'll understand this entire drawing. So that's our backlog. It's just a list of everything that we know that we need to do. And all of you are with me on this Scrum sprint, which you'll make sense in a second. So what is the backlog? So the backlog, this was a research from McCarthy and Monk, no relation to McCarthy Building Companies, just coincidentally the name, and that Scrum Incorporated used to explain how backlog improves communication effectiveness. You've got 2 axes here. On the left, you've got communication effective. At the bottom, you've got ineffective, and at the top, you have very effective. And then down here on the x-axis, you've got the richness or the temperature of the communication channel from cold all the way to hot. So you can see there's 2 lines here. A blue line, this is all types of human interaction where there's no question and answer, such as documentation, like construction documents, audio recordings, even video recordings, because people can't answer and ask questions. Remember, answer and ask your questions using the GoToWebinar, and we'll answer them at the end. So we want to get into the green zone. So we're going to shift from documentation to human conversation. So 2 people on email, least effective of the green, but still better than something where you can't ask and answer questions, all the way up to 2 people at a whiteboard, my favorite type of communication, where you can have a rich conversation about what someone's actually trying to communicate with you. And you can instantly acknowledge their message. So that's where we want to go. We want to shift to question and answer, and that's what a backlog does. Let's see how that works. So another thing, moving up from the backlog, we're going to answer those questions. We're going to do a sprint plan. In sprint planning, we're going to make the work visible. We're going to set a sprint duration, call it a time box. I'm looking at a timer right now, and we've got plenty of time to get through all of these slides and still answer most of your questions. So our time box, what I recommend to people, is typically a week. But for this presentation, we've got about 24 minutes to go. So that's what we're going to do as a team, all of you plus me. We're going to still look at this framework for about another 23 minutes, 25 seconds now. Tick tock, tick tock. But it's just a set duration. When Scrum was originally invented, almost 2 decades ago, the most typical time box was a month to 6 weeks. And then over time, with more and more teams practicing and just getting feedback and improving, people realized that the best, most ideal time box is a 1-week sprint. And a sprint is just a duration of time that the team is going to plan their work the plan, execute, do the work, and then review what they've done at the end of the week. And 1 week tends to be the best. In construction, even today, 1 week planning is the best. 5 points planned. So we've got in our backlog 5 questions to answer. I'm going to make each one of those questions worth 1 point. Points is a completely different conversation. We could talk about estimating points in Scrum for another 45 minutes in total. But just know that when you're starting out, make your tasks simple enough that they can be done in a single work day. And if you work, if you pick up something that's very large, it's going to take, let's say, 8 hours, and you start working on it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's going to carry over into the next day. But the task should be small enough that it could be accomplished in an 8-hour period. And then you don't want the task to be so small that it takes you more time to write it down and to get it through the Scrum framework than it does to actually just do it. So as a good rule of thumb, make your tasks, and we'll see what that looks like in a second, at a minimum of 15 minutes or greater. If something takes you less than 15 minutes to do, that's too simple, I would argue, to run through the Scrum framework. So just some food for thought. And that's the points that the team is going to earn by doing the work. And then there's the daily stand-up. Every single day, there's a routine set of questions to ask. In construction, we sometimes say the daily huddle, but in Scrum, we call it the daily Scrum. And then, of course, we're going to learn and adapt. So we look at the 2 on the right here. The sprint review, after the team does some work, they do the daily Scrum, they come back, and at the end of the week, if we're working just Monday to Friday, on Friday, we're going to review all the things that the team accomplished, all the value that was delivered. And then in a separate meeting, we're going to do a sprint retrospective. And we'll dive deeper into the 2 of those in just a second. Okay, so here's our backlog. We have where, why, who, when, and how. So let's make the work visible. Let's create a very simple Scrum board. So I've got my backlog off on the left. It could have totally been connected, but I chose to just put it off to the side. The minimum things that you need to have in your Scrum board is a to-do column, a doing column, and a done column. And you want to make your doing column only single card wide, no matter if you're using 4x4 Post-it notes, 3x3 Post-it notes. Don't make it so wide that you're tempted to multitask. You want to do one thing at a time. So let's put it in priority order. We'll start where is the most important, and we'll end with how. So this is all we have left to do. 20 minutes to go. We're going smooth, so smooth. So now we've made the work visible. We've taken the backlog, and we're going to carry this forward and work this through the Scrum framework. And we're going to start with, where is Scrum occurring in construction today? What a great question. So these are all the companies that I'm aware of that are currently using Scrum in construction, including some nonprofit groups. We have a mix of general contractors, trade partners, the Lean Construction Institute themselves. They've used it for the LCI Congress planning, 2 years and counting, as well as some architecture firms. So it's being used in construction. If this is the first time you're hearing about Scrum, don't worry about it. It's only been around for almost 30 years. But it takes time for these things to spread. I didn't learn about Scrum until 2014. So I was late to the party myself. Now, Scrum Everywhere else, you will recognize some of these companies. And just some things I want to point out as the list is populating. At Amazon, Scrum was a totally grassroots implementation. It wasn't Jeff Bezos declaring from on high the team should use Scrum. People in different parts of the Amazon organization learned about Scrum, and they just started using it, and it was encouraged. But the most interesting of all of these, well, let me go here first. Salesforce.com uses Scrum carte blanche. That means their entire organization uses Scrum. And if you use Salesforce, if you're so lucky as to use Salesforce for your customer relationship management software, it very much feels like you're in the Scrum framework. And that's because all of what Salesforce does is through Scrum teams. But that's not the most interesting. I think the most interesting is John Deere Tractor. John Deere Tractor, the manufacturing company, has been using Scrum to develop farm equipment for 2 decades. 2 decades! Every time I drive by a John Deere sales office or dealership in the heartland, especially when I'm in the Midwest, I always just my heart just warms up thinking about all the equipment that I'm seeing on display for sale was developed using the Scrum framework and methodology. Just love it. It warms me up every time, especially those cold drives in the heartland. Okay, so that's where Scrum's being used and where it's being used. Now let's answer why. Why would you use Scrum? So, before I do that, I don't want to forget the daily Scrum. I told you it's just 3 questions. So the easiest, and I learned this at the Scrum conference. Yes, there's actually a Scrum conference. 2 years ago, this concept of walking the board. So this is the way that the team can do the daily Scrum in such a way that everyone can focus on what everyone's actually doing and not worry at all about what they're going to say next. So let's just pretend that we're all on a team. It's my turn. I'm going to walk the board first. So the first question is, what did you do yesterday to finish the sprint? So I literally walk up to my Scrum board and I just point to what I actually got done. So yesterday I finished all the slides and what I was going to say, my talking points for where to use Scrum. That's what I did yesterday. The next thing I'm going to answer is, what did you do today to finish the sprint? Or what will I do? So today I'm going to answer why. I'm going to create slides for all the why and my talking points, and that's what I'm going to do today. And because I'm so slow, it's going to take me the rest of today. That's just my commentary. And then finally, the last question is, are there any obstacles blocking the sprint goal? So the sprint goal was set in that sprint planning meeting. And I'm going to say, of these final 3 things left, when to use Scrum for me is the most challenging, and I might need some help. So I might partner with John Ross at AGC, and we'll talk about when should we use Scrum. I might need his perspective to help me with this, and I can't finish this by myself. So John would say, if he was staying at this board with me, Felipe, that sounds good. Let's get together right after this stand-up meeting, and we'll figure it out. So at least we'll have a plan of how we're going to tackle that obstacle blocking me. Just imagine in your own teams, how powerful is it that if you can remove constraints or obstacles blocking your team members every single day? This is why I highly recommend that you don't skip on the daily Scrum. And if you forget everything I say, just think of how powerful it would be for yourself and your teams, removing people's obstacles so they can do their jobs more effectively and efficiently. Okay, so why Scrum? Back to our sprint here. Scrum is lightweight, simple, and difficult to master. So lightweight, it's adaptable. The framework allows for custom processes to manage and deliver complex work. I always laugh in Scrum circles, there is no Scrum police. So if you try to implement Scrum and you're not using the entire framework, no one's going to come and bust you and take you to Scrum jail for not doing it well. And when I got Scrum certified with Jeff Sutherland some years ago, he was very supportive of how we had adapted the Scrum framework for construction. So it's totally acceptable and encouraged from the co-creator himself. Now, Jeff will caution you if you say you're doing Scrum, but you're really just using a Scrum board or doing some type of other methodology, you're not using the values and the principles associated with Scrum, and at least understand all the parts and pieces, then you're only doing fake Scrum. Jeff's words, not mine. Jeff Sutherland, one of the co-creators of Scrum. Jeff and Ken Schwaber, in case you forgot. Now, simple. It's got minimal rules, purposeful actions, and built-in improvement feedback loops. I mean, that little drawing right there, that's it. That's it. That's the framework right there for how to deliver value. And difficult to master. Like, how could that be like why you'd want to do it? Well, like we talked about in the beginning with habits, Scrum is iterative and incremental improvement methodology. It contrasts current industry habits and many different types of traditional management methodologies. I could say, as being a project management professional from the Project Management Institute, PMP, they have really transformed their organization and offered a lot of agile methodologies and reviews. And even for me to maintain my PMP, I can do all of my continuing education credits with agile trainings. And most of the time, I just cherry pick all the Scrum topics, because we know that as complexity is increasing, the traditional management methods just won't work. So that's the why. If you want to get a deeper dive into the why, I recommend picking up Jeff's book, Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. And this is actually how I even became aware of it. I was reading a lot of books on lean construction or lean methodologies, lean manufacturing, and it was Amazon, of all things, said, hey, if you like this lean book, you might like this book on Scrum. And I was like, I looked into it. I was like, well, it's an interesting cover. Twice the work in half the time seems really promising. Chapter 1 is The Way the World Works is Broken. Okay, I was sold. Just on chapter 1 title alone, I was like, I've got to read this book because I'm not getting it done the way I'm currently working. And I'll show you what I mean. Chapter 2 is The Origins of Scrum. Jeff does a really good job of giving a rich, setting a context of how it came to be and how he developed it. Chapter 3 talks about teams and the perfect team size. In case you're wondering, the answer is 7 plus or minus 2. So that means a small but very impactful team could be as small as 5. 7 minus 2 is 5. And a big and still very impactful team would be 7 plus 2, or 9. 9 people. Once you start getting to teams of bigger than 10, you need to find a way of splitting your teams down into sub-teams. Or like an integrated project delivery, think about how we split teams into cluster groups. You know, very similar. And that's all for communication effectiveness. And Jeff does a much better job than I'm going to do in the final bits of this webinar to describe this team structure. Then he's got time. Surprise, time is finite. I'm watching the clock tick-tock down before we're going to head into the Q&A. And I'm feeling the pressure of the clock. I can honestly say that he's totally right. And the time is finite, and I'm running out of it right now. So let me keep going. Waste is a crime. Absolutely is. So think about that. Let that sink in. Let's not waste each other's time. Let's go for that number one principle, respecting people. And let's not waste our own time or the time of others. Plan reality, not fantasy. Another great chapter. And it talks a little more in detail. If you want to get deeper dive into points and Scrum estimating, he goes into it here in chapter 6. And just be aware that there's actually a debate within organizations that are using Scrum. There's a debate to whether people should estimate tasks and track velocity or not. And the debate is raging on. The struggle is real, but that's a separate topic. Chapter 7, happiness. Happiness chapter it's not what you think. It's actually all about what's called breaking through the happiness bubble, or people getting complacent. And I'll show you an example of myself in a second of how it even happens to me. Chapter 8 is priorities and just how to prioritize. Really good. And of course, changing the whole world in 11 steps. I mean, since the time this book was written, and I've talked to Jeff and J.J. Sutherland as recent as a year ago at the Scrum conference, and they said that they're actually going to, there's works to put in another book in place just to show more examples of where Scrum is being used outside of software development, which is a lot of places. Okay, so that's why you would use Scrum in super deep dive. Now, who? Let's answer this who. Okay, so going back to our drawing here, you notice there's some stick figure people. Let's start with the product owner. So that's Jason there. It's actually, and I'm sitting in Roseville, California, in McCarthy's office, and just by pure coincidence today, Jason is the office right next to me. That's typically not where I sit. It just so happens to be there. And he's the product owner of a pre-construction Scrum team. So Jason has the most experience dealing with customers that we do pre-construction services for. So on his team here, 7 people, he's the natural product owner. The product owner is the person on the Scrum team that has the closest relationship with the customer. The customer cannot be on your team. They have their own day job and their own business, right? Their own value creating thing. And we build in the built environment, you know, our customers, they vary. You know, you've got healthcare customers, education customers, private developers, public utilities, on and on and on, many different types of customers. So the person, when you're thinking about your own Scrum team, the product owner is the person that has the voice of the customer. It's that simple. And the product owner also helps to set the priorities for the team, what they're going to accomplish in any given sprint. Next, you got to have a Scrum Master. So that's Spencer, and he was the Scrum Master for a little while on this team. And this team actually rotates the Scrum Master duties. The Scrum Master is the person who knows the Scrum Framework and helps the team to work through the framework. Also helps to facilitate some of these meetings like the sprint planning, the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. And they also help to eliminate obstacles for the team. They help to escalate things and elevate issues so that the team can work effectively. So on this team, like I said, the Scrum Master rotates. And I actually talked to Jeff Sutherland about this in detail, and he details it in the book as well, Twice the Work and Half the Time. When he originally invented the framework, the Scrum Master and the product owner were the same person. He modeled them after the chief engineer at Toyota Motor Company. So Toyota, a chief engineer is the person that has, and just by experience requirements, about 15 to 20 plus years of experience at Toyota. And when they become elevated to the point that they become a chief engineer, they become they get put in charge of a process of a product line, like say for example the Prius line. So the chief engineer of Prius is responsible for all things Prius, but has no direct reports. So nobody works for the chief engineer. Everything that they accomplish has to be done using influence and persuasion. So Jeff realized with time that that's a very difficult skill set to get. And in order to get teams running, if you broke those two apart, and very successfully breaking it apart into 2 separate types of roles, has done very well. When you start a Scrum of yourself, you're going to realize you're going to be all 3, like I did. And of course, you got the development team. So everybody else in the picture in this pre-construction team, you know, they're estimators doing pre-construction services. They're the ones that do the things that create the value, right? And you can be all 3. Now, all of that works on the 3 pillars of Scrum, completely supported by transparency. Everyone can see what everyone is doing and understand what the work is. Inspection is not QA, QC, or quality control, quality assurance. Inspection is being able to go and see the value creating work live in a great understanding. And then adaptation. The only thing that we know guaranteed is that change is imminent and it occurs often. So you have to be able to adapt. These are the 3 pillars of Scrum, and they're outlined further in the Scrum Guide, which you will see in a second. So those are the three things. When you go to your Scrum certification, if you ever want to do such a thing, you don't have to use Scrum. But if you do, one of the first things that they tell you is rip up your business card because your titles don't matter. And I just coincidentally have no business cards right now, but that's okay. So here's me. In 2009, when I discovered Lean, and I understood that value in the customer's perspective, and I learned how to eliminate waste, I gained 40 hours a week, and I doubled my output. So I was working over 100 hours a week for years, a really slow learner. And then after discovering Lean, I kind of flatlined, and I stayed at a 60 to 70 hours a week, kept my bosses, my projects moving forward and happy, but it was still pretty flat until 2014. 2014, I discovered Scrum. I started working through the Scrum Framework as the product owner, the Scrum Master, and development team, and then working with others. And I tripled and improved my output even by sixfold by 2018 and even further. And let me show you how I track that. So today, I'm recommending to all of you to use Post-it notes and pen or Sharpie markers to start. But now I use Trello, which is just a digital card system that works very well with the Scrum Framework. And happy to say that I don't get any money from Trello. It's a standalone software company owned by Atlassian, another company that uses Scrum and everything that they do. But it's Trello.com, and you can sign up, and it's totally free. But again, don't go there first. Paper, go simple first to start. I've got a backlog column, things that I know that I need to do in the near future. I've got a to-do list, the things I'm doing in the next 5 days, my single doing thing that I'm doing right now. Like if you looked at my board today, it would say right now I'm doing this webinar, and then all the things that I've got accomplished in the last week. And I've got some cool metrics to share with you. So here's an example of some visual representation of how my tasks are getting done. I break down my tasks. It's a 90-day breakdown here, and into all these different labels or categories, like ranging from training to process improvements, even to social media and that type of thing. So here I got complacent. You could see my velocity from December, coming back from vacation. I was on vacation for like 3 weeks, and then coming back into January, because I had 2 trips a week for the first part of the year, I was pretty flat. And then I looked into this visual. On February 5th, I recategorized some of the work that I was doing with feedback from my boss, my supervisor, and just was challenged with what I needed to do differently this year, like increasing leadership engagement. So I started tracking that, and you can see what happens to my output over time once I can understand what travel was doing to me. The travel is not going to stop. Jesse Faywell says it best: using visual boards without metrics misses the whole point of improving performance. Once I could see that I was flat, I just recategorizing and spending a little more time planning my work totally transformed my output. And you can see my improvement there. So just in under 30 days, I tripled my output in under 30 days. And like I said, I just make each of my tasks worth a single point. I've already given my spiel on that. So that's me. And you think like, well, you're really weird and you're a Scrum Master. But no, look, here's a team. No official Scrum Masters. There's Jason again and Spencer. You can see him now on the other side, and some other people. The interesting thing about this team is they actually change people in and out. They'll roll to active construction sites. They don't all stay in pre-construction permanently. What did they accomplish? They started using Scrum, and we're just measuring how many projects that they were working on any given time, and they could not break through the 2 projects at a time barrier for the longest. Once they started using Scrum, within 4 months, they tripled their output. They started tracking velocity, and then they increased their output almost 7 times. And I tell you right now, I looked at their Scrum board today, it's at 7. And they've got 3 new members on the team, and they're still maintaining that 7 output level, 7 different projects. 1 at a time, always working one thing at a time. They're not working on 7 things simultaneously, each person. But that team of 7 people split things up now. The cool thing is that they started leading their own onboarding, their training and onboarding themselves. And they started helping other teams in other regions. And that's all because they increased their capacity. They could not have done that before, and they weren't doing it before. But after, this is what happened using the Scrum Framework. So that's the who. once you use it. So you can think about all the work that we do follows along this work continuum. Let's say we've got simple, complicated to complex. The Scrum work zone is when you get anywhere into complicated to complex. That's when you want to use Scrum. So if you're just like, doing something simple and repetitive that you've done 1,000 times and it's on the simple side, Scrum is not a good candidate for that type of work. That should be some other lean methodology or improvement methodology. But when you go from complicated to complex, that's a great place to use Scrum. So just some food for thought when you do it. Typically, if you're going to do a 5-day sprint, Monday to Friday, you do the daily Scrum every day, 15 minutes or less. And of course, you're going to do the work all day. On Monday, that's a good day for sprint planning, and Monday mornings are better for that. And sprint planning can go from 10 minutes, if the team's well-oiled machine, to as much as an hour, or maybe even 3 hours. It's the very first time you're doing it. On Friday, you do the sprint review, where you just look at what actually the team accomplished. And in the separate meeting, you do the sprint retrospective, where you answer a couple of the same questions that you do in the daily Scrum, but you also check to see what improvement can be made in the next Scrum and how fast is the team going. So that's the one. So we're getting time to Q&A is upon us almost. How do you do it? Use the Scrum Guide. So it's 19 pages long. It gives you the purpose of the guide, definitions, Scrum theory, where it's used, the values, the members of the Scrum team, Scrum events, Scrum artifacts, artifact transparency, and a couple of endnotes. There's Jeff Sutherland on the left, Ken Schwaber on the right, and this guy was just updated November 2017. So that's the how. Remember, it's easy to understand, difficult to master, tick-tock, feeling the pressure. Everybody, please, please, please start small. Start with yourself. Get better every single sprint, and then share this with somebody else. All the things you're going to forget, I'm going to leave you this link here. This is my public-facing Trello website board. It's got the Scrum Guide. You can click on this card, download the Scrum Guide yourself. It's got some resources and videos to watch, a link to the Red Book, as well as an animated video explaining the Red Book, and then just some food for thought. If you like Trello and you want to use it, there's a Getting Started with a Trello card here. I know some of you in the construction industry use Trello, and that's it. Thank you for your time. You've been an amazing audience, all on mute. I love it. Just kidding. Okay, now it's time for the Q&A. So, John, you want to feed me up some questions? Let's get this going.
Absolutely. We do have a few that have trickled in here. The first one, thank you for the amazing presentation and ideas. My question is how BIM, Incorporation and Communication Tool, will serve Scrum Framework and Lean Construction Principles.
So BIM, B is in boy, I am Building Information Modeling. Is that
Correct.
that BIM? Yeah.
Yes,
So
I
how does
believe so.
BIM? Yeah. So BIM, Building Information Modeling, is a technology in of itself that there's a BIM group just down the hall from me right now. They operate in this way. It's just a technology, right? It's a way for teams to build models, what we used to do in 2D, and kind of see the building. It's rapid prototyping, if you will. It's a digital version of what you're going to build. So you could completely, you can align that process and how you develop your model, how you remove clashes, different components, like be it architectural, structural, or mechanical systems as examples, right? So all of that, you can do BIM, and the industry does BIM all day long, not using the Scrum framework. But you can put that process through the Scrum methodology, exactly as like, how are we going to develop the model? We're going to start architectural first. How are we going to resolve clashes? All those things can be populated through your backlog. You do it with the team that's going to do all the work, get agreement, alignment on the priority for how to develop the model, how to resolve clashes, and then you can run it through the Scrum framework, and you can finish your BIM execution plan much faster than traditional methods. So try it out, experiment with it, highly encourage it, definitely do it. Good question.
Fantastic. Another one for you. Do you see Scrum applying more to the pre-construction design phase of a project rather than the actual construction phase of the project?
I don't. But a disclaimer, I'm super biased. I've used Scrum. When I first started using it, I was just coincidentally on a hard bid construction project. And when I first started using it half a decade ago, my team wanted nothing to do with it. So I used it in a vacuum by myself and had these crazy capacity gains. Like I warned you all, I started having time to get into what they were doing and do some additional coaching. And eventually I started working with pre-construction teams. But I'm happy to say that I see it used in both pre-construction and in construction phase parts of jobs. You saw the results of our pre-construction team there. There's another pre-construction team, and we have another office in Texas that started using it. They kind of rebooted it to get deeper into the framework, and they quadrupled their output in the first 5 days of using the Scrum framework. But I also have teams in construction, coincidentally, other hard bid project teams and design build teams using Scrum during the construction phase for all the project management type of things. Not for scheduling the work in the field. We have different parallel processes for that, but I've seen teams manage like RFIs, submittals, change orders, drawing reviews, all of that using the Scrum framework so the team can align. And I've seen this on healthcare teams in construction, parking structure teams, education teams, design build teams. I'm starting to see it more and more and more in both places. And when you first look at it, and the example I gave is just this pre-con team, that's just purely out of, they sit right next to me so I can see what they're doing all the time. And they've been at it for over a year versus, you know, the construction teams where I'm dropping in on them periodically and I'm seeing them use it over the course of the last couple of years. But it's great. I see it in both. And the architecture firms that I listed there, some of those firms use Scrum to organize their entire office, and that's how they control the resources of their architects that are deployed in different parts and projects, be it in the design phase or in construction phases for contract administration. Good question.
This one seems like it may build off this well. Have you ever included subcontractors with your Scrum framework, like in Last Planner System?
Yes, but not with their knowledge. So, that's a good question. Like when I first started using it, literally no one had ever heard of it in construction. I was working in Orange, California, which is in Southern California, and just outside of LA County. It's a beautiful Orange County. It is called Orange, California. It's a nice city. If you ever get a chance to visit. And I was using the Scrum framework for I was running probably from memory like 8 different subcontractors, and everything that they needed from me, I made cards, prioritized it with my overall work, and worked it through the framework, so always delivering to them. So they didn't get to like participate in it like you would see like a traditional Scrum team, but I was running all of my work through the framework, so they were participating and getting the benefits. I could tell you on that job, hard bid project, it's a tough performing arts theater project. The trades that I was managing all finished on time and without any types of claims, which is, those of you that work in construction on a hard bid environment, that's a miracle in of itself. And I credit that completely to the Scrum framework. Also, each of those trades, they made their margins. So they were profitable. And they said it was very easy to work with us. And I was like, yeah, it was easy because I had this visual way of daily prioritizing and improving every single week. Some of them that would come to my office, they would see my Post-it note Scrum board on the wall and they'd ask about it. And they'd look into it and started using it themselves. But it was just purely by me operating successfully through the framework that helped me give them what they need so I can remove constraints and blockers for them so they could be successful and achieve all their business goals as well. And we delivered an amazing theater at the end of the day.
Fantastic. Here's another one for you. Your visual board shows great improvements in your productivity. May I ask what kind of tasks you're tracking?
Yeah, so good question. So my work as the lean construction director for McCarthy Building Companies is centered on 3 main areas. So it's leadership, communication, and training. So everything that I do has to fall into one of those three categories. And then this year, and that February 5th, coincidentally, that was the end of the week after meeting with my supervisor, and we did a deep dive into the three areas that I work. And we got more detailed on what types of leadership tasks should I be working on more regularly, like how to engage with senior leadership across McCarthy's 5 regions, and including our executive team based out of St. Louis. And then how effective was I communicating the things that the teams were doing that I was seeing and being called to do, and as well as like training, on the job training, developing trainings, webinars like this, speaking at conferences, and just more detail into all that. So everything falls into those three categories, and that's what I track. And my boss has complete access to my board. He can see what I'm working on at any given time, and we can just see, when it's time to improve. And I'm so hard on myself, he never has to actually get hard on me for not being productive, because I have that visual way to see it. And I try to, it's not about doing just, squeezing the last drop of effort out of me. It's about doing value adding activities. So all of my cards, like this webinar, it takes care of two things for me. It takes care of communication, spreading these lean methodologies and principles in the industry. It also helps me with leadership engagement, because people will talk about this and hear about it, and I can always directly correlate an event like this to more requests in the company as well as outside the company for these types of training engagements. So value-added activities is what you want to track. If you're doing, like if you're, I don't put on there like going to lunch or any type of travel. Travel is a type of waste, so I don't track that. I try to minimize travel, and I only count the things that add value to our organization, business value. Good question.
Looks like we've got time for about one more. If the Scrum planning is done on Monday for the week ahead, is it easy enough to include tasks that may become urgent over others during the week?
Yeah, so like you saw, once I took those 5 questions and put into the backlog, that first column, I'm mimicking how Post-it notes would travel across your Scrum board. The column closest to the doing column is the most important thing. And then the column to the left, further away, that was closer to where all the backlog stuff was, are the lower priorities for the week. But those are all the things that we're planning to do in the next 5 days. So your top of your list is your paramount priority. And teams that operate through the framework start to learn that stuff's going to change. Like middle of the week, you might get a customer call on a Wednesday, and your product owner will shift, negotiating with the team, shift some priorities around based on where the team is. I just actually saw today, Jason he walked up to one of the people on the team, walked up to Gio, and he said, Gio, I want you to go ahead and finish what you're doing right now, but there's this thing I'm going to need you to do next. And that was a shift. So they did a quick little negotiation about what Gio was finishing now, and then what was going to come next. And then they just seamlessly put it right into the flow of what they were doing. And you totally will change and adapt. You want to minimize that as much as possible. Like you don't want to be firefighting and shifting all the time. You want to have some, the more planning you do, like I said, like the biggest increases in productivity and output will be you spend more time planning. It's counterintuitive, but the more time a team spends together on Monday and better planning the tasks for the week, the higher the likelihood they're going to finish all of those things and have enough buffer time to do other things. Like one of the things we recommend teams do is you increase your capacity. Build in some development time, like read a book, train, get better on your skill set, something that helps you do your job better. And if you've done a lot of that, also do something else for self-enrichment. Like you don't need to to be constantly in this firefighting mode. You can adapt and still have time to easily get everything done. Awesome. Thank you, John. Good questions.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, that is all the time for questions that we have today. Felipe, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your presentation.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Procore and AGC, for allowing me the venue to to speak, and you can see my contact information there. There's no statute of limitations on questions. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Check out that public-facing Trello board, and everyone have a great, productive week.
And thank you, everybody, for logging in today, and have a nice day.